Hello again, here we are for some daily JavaScript. And, in the last video I showed an example with some cards kind of flipping over. And what I'd like to do here is rebuild that example. And then maybe we'll move on and use it in a game or something like that. So what I've got here is I've got a basic HTML document. And it's got the doc type, the head tag, the title tag. It's got one link here to jQuery. Okay, so that's the only special thing, and I'm going to assume that everybody can get the link to the jQuery on the CDN. And other than that, there's just an empty script tag and an empty style tag here, and we'll add stuff to that in a moment. So the first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to build the basic structure, and what I'm going to start with is a div, and I'll give it the class name container. Okay, and this is going to be the container for some squares that are going to flip over. And we're going to use the 3D transform in CSS to make the flip happen. And that means that this container element is going to be sort of our 3D viewport. Okay, so we're going to have to apply the perspective style to this container. Okay, let's get started. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to style the container. And just so we can see where it is, I'm going to give it a border. So I'll say border 1 pixel solid black. How about that? Right? That's a pretty good style. And then what I'd like to do is I'd also like to give it a width and a height. So I'm going to make the boxes inside 100 by 100 pixels. And then I'll give them a 5 pixel margin. So that means we're going to need 330 pixels to contain them, right? And then I'll give it a height of 330 pixels. And then we'll take a look, right? So maybe we'll, oh, there we go, right? So I'll refresh, and there's my, my box, right? So I've got this document open in the browser. And now I want to move this box into the center of the screen. And that's actually kind of just a good trick all by itself, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this method. I'm going to set the position to absolute, and then I'll set the left to 50% and the top to 50%. And now you can see that the upper left corner is 50% of the width and down 50% from the height. So this upper left corner is actually in the very center of the screen. The problem is I actually want the box, like the center of the box, to be here, right? So what I want to do is I want to move the box over half its width and up half its width, okay? And there's a couple ways to do this. I'm going to do it with calc, okay? And so calc will let us perform a calculation on the math here, or the the numbers that we plug into our CSS properties, right? And what's nice about calc is we can mix calculations against different units. So here I can calculate 50% versus pixels, right? 165 pixels, and this number 165 is half of the 330, right? So that's where that came from. Remember, we want to move this over half the width and height. Okay, so I'll save that, and then we'll refresh it here, and now the box is in the middle of the screen. Hey, so that worked out pretty good. Oops, I hit save there, and let's go back. So that's looking pretty good. And now, like I said, I want this container to act as a viewport for elements that are going to have the CSS 3D properties applied to them. So what I'll do is I'll say perspective, and then we can put the perspective in here. Now perspective needs to have a unit, okay? So I'm going to say 1,000 pixels, or you could say 500 pixels, or any number, right? You can do any unit too. The thing about perspective is, imagine this as the distance the viewport is to the camera. Okay, and so the farther away the viewport gets from the camera, the less extreme the perspective is. So, a larger number like 5,000 will have a very mild perspective, and a smaller number like, 100 will have an extreme perspective. Okay, So this is, imagine if you had a card and you held it up to your face and you flip it over in front of your face and it's very close, maybe an inch away from your eye. The perspective is very extreme. If you extend your arm to the full length and you turn the card over, the perspective effect on the card is less, right? So that's kind of the same thing that's going on here. This is the distance to the viewport, right? So imagine that this is like the screen and the distance to your eye or something, right? Okay. So anyway, so now we've got our perspective set up, and what I want to do is I want to create a series of cards inside the container, and each of my cards is going to be built in this way. There's going to be a since I want them to flip over, we could just do it with one div, but since I want my div to be able to flip over and show two different faces, what I'll need to do is use this sort of structure. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have an outer div here. We'll give it a class name of box because that's what I used in the last example. And then it'll have two inner divs. And the inner divs will have a class name of, front and back. Okay? And so this front face will contain the image that we want on the front of the card, and the back face will have the image that we want on the back of the card. And then we can just duplicate this block right here for each card that we want to create. I'll just create the first one, and then we can add more later just by copying this. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we need to style box, right? So there we go, right? So I've got the class name here. And what I want to do is I want to give this a width of 100 pixels and a height of 100 pixels and a margin of 5 pixels, okay? And I'm also going to use float. So, I'm going to arrange everybody in a grid, and it's easy to do that with float. So I'm going to use float left, and then, if I add more of these, they'll all stack up left to right and wrap onto the next line, right? So we've got that. And then I'm not going to give this any, visual characteristics like a background color. I'm going to reserve that for the front and back classes, okay? One thing I am going to do is right here, I'm going to give this a transform style, okay? And I'm going to give it the transform style preserve 3D. This is required. Without this, it won't work correctly, okay? So, the back and front face, you'll see when we set those up, they're going to, in order for these to look correct, their parent element needs to have transform style preserve 3D, okay? So we're going to add that on there. And then let's see here. So now, right now we won't be able to see anything, right? Because the box here is transparent, right? So let's add the front and back styles, and then we'll actually be able to see something. So here we go. Let's do front. And for the front face, we'll give it a background color of red. And maybe I'll just separate these all into their own styles. So I'll do background, how about image? And I have some images in a folder here. Maybe I'll choose this one right here. Right, so there's my image. You could put anything in there. And then or you could even just leave this out because we'll have I'll do the back face as blue, right? So we'll be able to see the color change, so you don't even need an image. And then I want to set up the background position, center, and background repeat, no repeat. Okay, so it'll just be one copy of this image in the middle, okay? So there we go. And one last thing, right? We're going to add the property backface visibility, and then the value is going to be hidden. So this is another thing that's required, okay? So backface visibility says when a 3D object is flipped over, do we see it or not see it? Okay, so does it have a front and a back face? And that actually has some implications in 3D, because 3D is more efficient if you only look at objects from one side. And a lot of times if you have a solid 3D object, you don't want to see the back face because it's interior, right? It would be the inside of a solid object, right? So this is important in this example, because when we flip the card over, I don't want to see this front face, right? So it should be hidden when it's flipped over, right? So we're going to set the back face visibility to hidden, okay? Okay, so here's our, let's test it now. We'll save that, and oh, we don't see it. I forgot. We need one more thing here, right? In order for this image to be able to fill this element, the element needs to have a width and a height, right? And since we're using the box up here to set the width and height, maybe for the front element, we'll just set the width to 100% of it. That'll be 100% of its parent, right, and the 100% height of the parent, right? So it'll be 100 pixels by 100 pixels, and that'll allow us, we can just set the size here, and then this will inherit, right? Let's save that and refresh it. Oh, look, there's our character in the middle, and there's the box, right? So now let's do the next step, right? Let's say, box here, we'll do a quick test here, right, before we do the last step, right? Let's say the box here, we want to flip it over. So I'm gonna give it the transform property, and then what we'll do is we'll say rotate on the Y, right? And let's say I rotate it, 44 degrees, okay? So I'll save that, and then I'll refresh here, and you can see that the box rotates, right? So there's 44 degrees. And what if I rotate it to, let's say, 80 degrees? So it rotates a little more, right? And then let's say I rotate it to, 120 degrees. Right, now we don't see it because the back face visibility is hidden, right? So that's what that's going to do for us. So now when we create another face to represent the back, we'll see that when it flips over, and you'll see how, right? So let's take this transform off here. Maybe I'll just leave it there, but I'll just put rotate Y of 0 degrees, right? Okay, so let's get back to our styles. And what I want to do is I want to add a style for back. So that's the second div inside here. And what I'm going to set for this one is I'm going to borrow some of the same styles here, right? Some of the same ones. Even maybe we could just even copy all of this, right? So I'm going to copy all these, and I'm going to use a different color here. Let's call it blue, okay? And then maybe I'll use a different image too, and I think I have an image that's number 9, so I'll use that. Yeah, there we go, right? So I got a different one there. And then all of this can be the same. And on the back face, I'm going to add one more property. Transform rotate Y of 180 degrees. Okay, so imagine that we have two faces here, and one of them is flipped 180 degrees. So essentially, when the container is rotation 0, we're looking at the back side of the back face, and since it's back face visibility hidden, we don't see it, right? And then when it flips over, the front one is, the back is facing us, so we don't see it, but the back one, now we're facing the front, and we see it, right? So we'll save this, and we'll refresh it here, and there's the front, right? And what I want to do is, maybe let's just for fun, let's set up like a little CSS flip, right? So, and I'm going to take this out in a moment, right? But let's set up a transition. Let's call it 400 milliseconds. And then maybe here we'll say box : hover, right? And when you hover over the box, we'll set, I'll just copy this transform right here, and we'll set the transform to 180 degrees. Okay, so when you hover, the box will flip 180 degrees, and the transition will take 400 milliseconds. Oh, I got a little problem there with my box, right? Let's do one more thing, right? I forgot, since the boxes are, these are just divs, they'll stack up vertically, right? So what we should do is add, for the front face here, we'll add position absolute left of 0, top of 0. And so that's on the front face, and then the back face will have the same properties. So I'll just copy those and add them down here. So the back face is position absolute left of 0, top of 0. Okay? And we'll save that, and then I'll refresh it again, and now you can see we've got our flip, right? So that worked pretty good, but maybe we want to do this with JavaScript where you click it and then it flips, and then you click and it unflips, right? So we're almost done here. I'm going to scroll up to the top here, and what I want to do is I'm going to leave the transition here, okay, for 400 milliseconds. And then I'm going to change the hover state. So I don't want to use the hover anymore. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an extra property here called flip, okay? So, and notice there's no space there, okay? It's important that there's no space because this CSS selector right here says that an element has both box and flip classes. Like both those classes are together on the same object, okay? And in that case, then the transform rotate Y 180 degrees is applied. If you put a space, then the flip class must be inside an element with the box class. So this must be a child or descendant element of box if you put a space here, right? So without the space, we're saying both these classes are on the same element, okay? So now we're good, right? And then maybe for fun, we will go down to the script tag here. So I've already got a script tag at the bottom of my body tag here, and I've already imported jQuery, so I can just use jQuery, right? I've got it imported at the top of my code and in the head of the document, right? And what I want to do is for every element that has the class name box, I want to add a click action. Okay, so here's my click action. And when you click, what I want to do is this element that you clicked on, I want to toggle the class called flip. Okay, so when you click on this element, if that element has the class called flip, it removes the flip class. If it doesn't have the flip class, it adds the flip class. Okay, well, let's take a look at it. Let's save it. And we'll refresh it here, and when I click, it flips over, and then when I click again, it flips back. And let's take a look at the inspector, right? So when I look at the inspector, what you'll see here is when I go to the box element, I make the text a little bit bigger there, right? When I go to this element here, you can see it doesn't have the class flip. It's just box. And when I click on it, the jQuery's toggle class sees that the flip class doesn't exist, and so it adds the flip class, right? And when I click it again, since it has the flip class, it removes the flip class, okay? So toggle class toggles the state of the class, turns the class on or off, adds or removes the class, right? And you can see when we have the class, then we get this transform 3D, rotate Y 180 degrees, and since box has the transition of 400 milliseconds, then that determines how long the transition takes, right? So there we go. And if you want to add more boxes, then we can just copy this this whole block right here. So this represents one box, right, with the front and back face. So maybe I'll paste this a few times. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, okay? And there we go, right? So now I can click on any one of these and flip them or unflip them, okay? So I hope that's interesting. Notice a couple things here. Notice the perspective here. The perspective, since the outer box with the black border is is the parent and it has perspective, the center point of this box is sort of the vanishing point for the perspective effect, right? Also, the value, earlier I talked about the value for perspective. At 500 pixels, this determines like how much perspective is applied. If I change that to a smaller number, the perspective effect is more extreme. Let me refresh it here, right? You can see, wow, the perspective is pretty extreme there, right? And you can see as it flips, like the line, along the edge of the box, like the diagonal lines all point towards the center here, right? Okay. And if you want to create a less extreme perspective, then you will use a larger number here for perspective. So if I change that to 1000 from 100 and then refresh it here, you can see the perspective effect is much more mild, right? So anyway, so that gives you a pretty good idea of using perspective, and it goes over that last example kind of in more detail, and thanks for watching.